thinking, oh, which of these can get me the highest marks? I don't care which of the topics you like, you're there for marks, okay? So think, which of these topics can get me the most marks? Hi my loves, and you're welcome back or welcome to my channel if you've never been here. So I'm Priscilla, but I go by Sillasa on this channel. On this channel we discuss everything education, lifestyle, so if that's the kind of content you're interested in, make sure that you subscribe and turn on your post notifications. I try to post at least every week, so yeah, just make sure you're subscribed and your notifications are turned on so you don't miss anything that I post, especially during this whole exam season, okay? The last video I did was the one on chemistry, how to do well in your A-level chemistry exams, and I promised that I was going to do a follow-up on biology, which I'm doing today. However, there's going to be like a slight tweak to today's content. Usually I just go through everything, so what you need to do, like past papers, resources that I use and things like that. But I thought for today, and specifically for biology, I thought that I'd focus on paper 3, the 25 markers. That's the part I personally struggled with the most, and I feel like that's the main part that most people struggle with. This video is going to be split into 8 segments. So the first one, just going through what to expect, the kind of questions you're going to get, and then the second part will be about planning, so how to scan the topic for clues, how to effectively plan your essay. Then we're going to talk about how to plan your essay and gain marks from that planning as well. Then I'm also going to focus on how to organize your essay, timing, choosing the right essay for you, and finally just bringing everything together to make sense out of this video. So hopefully by the end of this you feel a bit more confident going into your exams and setting that 25 marker, because I feel like if you've got that in the bag you'll do really well, because like I said, that is one of the most difficult parts of the biology exam in my opinion. So let's get right into it. When it comes to being aware of the task that you're being faced with, you need to know what to expect. So when you go into the exam for paper 3, you're going to have 2 options and you have to answer one of the questions. So what is the essay marked on? It's based on a scale and it's marked using a 16:3:3:3 ratio. It's split into 4 segments. 16 marks for content, 3 marks for breadth, 3 for relevance, and 3 for quality of communication. So what is content? To get the content marks, you literally have to include the span of at least 5 areas in some detail with 2 key points and a specific example. Hydrolysis of ATPase releases energy that can be used for specific processes. For example, provides energy for active transport of mineral ions against a concentration gradient in a root hair cell of a plant. So you notice how I have a couple of key terms in there in that one sentence. These identify it as being a high quality answer for the marker. You could have said something like ATP is used for active transport of ions in a plant. Technically it's the same point you made, but this is a much lower quality answer to give. You want to draw from either specification, content, or A-level equivalent knowledge. Just so you know, I've got my laptop here and I made loads of notes just so I know that I'm being succinct and I'm saying the right things. I know there have been a few times, or there will be a few times, that I'll look down here. It's just because I've got my laptop on here. So moving on to breadth then, which again, you've got 3 marks allocated to breadth. So this should be one of the easiest marks to get. So you just have to make sure that you use examples from at least 3 modules, kingdoms that you've been taught. So most of the examples you get when it comes to questions, most of them will be based on animal teaching that you've got, fewer on plants and hardly any on fungi. If you were doing an essay on, let's say, proteins, and you have very few bacteria examples, you could basically source the membrane channels as an example. What I mean by this is you can say something along the lines of, protein molecules can act as channel proteins which provide a route by which hydrophilic species can pass through the cell membrane. A bacteria such as E. coli in the stomach of a mammal would use these channels to absorb nutrition such as ions like sodium from the host. Okay, so even though you didn't have like much information on that one subject, you can draw generic information and make sense out of that. So that is the breadth marks. They want to make sure that you're given examples from at least 3 modules that you've learned. Okay, so then it brings me straight to relevance. You want to have as much breadth as possible, but you want to make sure that it's relevant to the question that you're being asked. Okay, so essentially the only advice here is to keep it to the point. Okay, so in an essay on a role of like nucleic acid, for example, talking about the jobs of proteins that code for it is a bit off topic and will cause you to lose marks. Yes, you want to have enough breadth, but you don't want to talk about things that are not relevant to the question. And then when it comes to quality, which is the last 3 marks that you have, all that goes into the quality section is physical construction of the sentence, making sure that there are no grammatical errors, making sure that your sentences are cohesive and they make sense to the reader. So what you want to do here is to lead the reader through a logical sequence. I've marked a couple of essays like personal statements and things, and when things are not cohesive, it's just so confusing for me as a reader. And you can imagine this person who's marking your essay has got 50 plus more essays to mark. So if your essay is not really cohesive, it's very easy to throw the marker off, and that's what you don't want to do. So basically the quality marks, it's just grammar. It's just making sure that you have a good physical structure for your essay, something that's logical, it's coherent, and it's easy to follow. Okay, so then we're going to move straight into scanning the title for clues and effective planning. So with this, what I like to say most importantly is to use your head and not your heart. If you see a topic you like, don't just dive straight into answering that. Make sure that you've planned. I'll talk about planning later. Make sure that you plan both essays if you can, and go for the one that you have most points on. Look for words that allow an expansion of content. So if you see something like living organisms, it allows you to draw on animals, on plants, on bacteria, on fungi. If something is a bit too narrow, it might be a bit harder to write things on. But if you see something like living organisms and you think, oh, you can incorporate more things on that, then that might be worth choosing as a topic to answer. So now to planning. So I've shown you how to gain marks using the 16:3 to 3:3 ratio. So now I'm going to show you how to gain marks from planning. If you sit down and have like a really good look at these synoptic essay topics, mostly there's a 50-50 split. So if you've got a topic like structure and function relationships of carbohydrates, you've got the structure part and you've got the function, and it's talking about carbohydrates. If you've got a topic like how are the shapes of cells related to their function, so you've got shapes and you've got function. Most of these topics have like a 50-50 split to allow you to have loads to talk about. Okay, so make sure that you break the topics down into two and pick out the two main parts that they want you to answer. One thing you don't want to do is go off a tangent again and just answer one part of the essay and completely neglect the other part. You don't want to do that, because then you'll lose the content marks. Okay, I'm gonna give you like a random topic to work on. Let's say you have something about like the structure and function relationships of carbohydrates. On a piece of paper, I just want you to split the page into two vertically. At the top, on the left, you want to put structure, and on the right hand side you want to put function. Now what I want you to do is to split that page into 8, okay, so that now your paper has like a grid of 16 boxes. You've got 16 marks allocated to content. You've got 16 boxes to work on. That is 1 content mark per box if you plan your work appropriately. So now in your plan you can fill in the box and the functions and relate them to your structure. So for example, on the right hand side, if you put something like cellulose cell wall provide strength and support, on the left hand side, relating to the structure, you can put things like long unbranched polysaccharide, hydrogen bonds, microfibrils. And then if you go back to the next grid, so on the right hand side you can put a function, so the component of DNA or RNA nucleotides. On the left hand side for structure, you could put monosaccharides, 5 carbon sugar distinguishes DNA from RNA. Move on to the next box. If you put on the right hand side again for function, energy storage molecule in plants. On the left hand side you can put branched, large amounts of glucose in small volumes, easily hydrolyzed, insoluble. So you see how we're making sense of this. From what we've done here alone, we have got 6 boxes filled, which is 6 out of 16 marks we've literally got in the bag already. If you have a good plan, you can't go wrong. Repeat this process until as many of the boxes are filled as you possibly can. And once you've collected something to say on each of the A pairs, you can literally now start to structure and begin your essay. Moving on swiftly to organizing the perfect essay. Now we want to look at developing that theme so that we can add a bit more detail and produce an essay that flows and has structure instead of a random series of unconnected sentences. When it comes to structure, if you've done what we suggested earlier, you should now have a piece of paper on which your plan is outlined, but it'll be carved into a series of boxes. It may be that you are unable to find examples to enter for some of the boxes, which is completely fine. What you want to do at this point is to ask yourself, is my essay balanced? Like, do I have a good balance in here? What do I mean by this? By this I mean, are there whole sections where there's nothing in them? If this is the case, you might try to think of content to fill them up. Try not to keep adding more examples into boxes. Your focus must be on putting something, anything, into as many boxes as possible. And once you have made a point, you'll not get any more by adding more examples, okay? So if that box is filled, leave it alone and move on to the next box. If the essay question is something about the importance of proteins, don't spend the whole essay talking about enzymes, because enzymes is only one little role of proteins. So that's what I mean by, well, you need to move on and give other examples of let's say the role of a protein. But if you struggle to find specific content, then try to use generic things from biology. So things like cells, membranes, ATP, proteins, respiration, things like that, to force specific examples. So for example, if I needed a role of a protein in a fungi, I can always use a generic example like the enzyme ATPase, which will hydrolyze ATP to ADP and PI, releasing energy for active transport from mineral ions into a hyphae of a saprobiotic fungus. So use the information from one of your boxes at a time to try and develop it into the following elements. So if I was doing cycles in biology and I was in the molecular box, I might say something like coenzymes are molecules that work with dehydrogenase enzymes, which is the key point 1, to transfer hydrogen ions and electrons from a substrate during respiration. This is key point 2. For example, NAD accepts 2 electrons and 2 H+ ions from glucose during glycolysis in an animal cell during aerobic respiration. Specific example 1. And NADP accepts 2 electrons and 2 hydrogen ions during the light-dependent reaction in the thylakoid of a chloroplast in a palisade cell during photosynthesis. This is specific example 2. So both of these get reoxidized when the electrons are passed down an electron transport chain, the cycle bit. This is how I would break down 2 key points and 2 key examples in my essay. Always, always, always make sure that you link the content back to the question, to the title of the essay. So avoid falling into the trap of just regurgitating lists of flowcharts of content. If I was doing an essay on DNA and information transmission, I'll not just discuss the key points of DNA replication or mitosis. I'd link them back to the title first to show the examiner that I understand the topic that I have been given. Okay, so what I mean by this is saying something like the genetic information encoded in DNA must be transmitted to genetically identical daughter cells when mitosis takes place for growth and repair. To ensure this takes place, a semi-conservative replication of DNA takes place in the late interphase of the cell cycle. The enzyme helicase, blah blah blah. You see, so what I've done there is that I've included detail of replication and mitosis safely in the knowledge, and I've included enough context and made it clear. Okay, so now we're moving on to one thing that might very much happen. What do you do if you get stuck? This is a nightmare. Like most of my exam preps and things, like I think I've planned, you've got everything planned, you've got the boxes filled, you start writing, but then you get stuck. The first thing you want to try and do is force yourself to think outside the box. Try and come up with any relevant thread that you can. Add any extra if you dry up by asking yourself why, so what, to do what. So let's say you're writing something about animals, and avoid sweeping statements like, oh, fur is important to animals. Like, we all know that. Ask yourself why it's very important to animals, and then it clicks in and you're thinking, oh, so fur is important because it provides a type of camouflage, and it also gives protection from predators. And then you could build upon this by asking yourself, so what is the consequence of not having fur? So, you know, questions like so, what, why, things like that help you to just add a bit more into the content segment and get those marks in. In the same vein, you want to avoid going too deep. Okay, like I said, it's only so many examples you can give for one subheading. So even though you're stuck and you're trying to put things, you're trying to draw knowledge and you're trying to make sense out of things, avoid going too deep down one rabbit hole. Okay, you don't want to do that. So there should be a balance. You should have enough examples on one subtopic, but avoid going too deep that you're getting thrown off a grid. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then lastly, what to do when you're stuck is avoid lengthy openers or conclusions. It's not an English language essay, so we don't need any fluff in your essay. Everything you put in there is there to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to gain you some marks. Okay, so avoid lengthy conclusions and openers. If you don't need them, don't put it in there. And then we move on to one of the most important parts: timing. It's a 25 marker. I'd say leave 35 minutes for that, so you have 25 minutes for writing, so that's one mark per minute, and leave yourself about 10 minutes for planning, guys. That's how important planning is. Okay, now we're going to talk about fleshing out the plan in the last few minutes. So it may seem odd to discuss adding flesh to the bones of a plan at the end, but it's really vital. So the examiners will credit content that is clearly described in the plan, but only if it has not been included. I want you to make sure that your plan is still clear and readable to the examiner, because what they do is the examiner will give credit to content you've got in the plan if it makes sense, if it's readable, and if you haven't already included it in your actual 25 mark essay. Okay, let's say you have like 3 minutes left and you think you're good, you finish writing your essay. Go back to the plan and add a few more things to it. Just keep writing, add a few more examples that add breadth to your plan. Because if it's readable and you haven't included that example you're putting into the plan in your actual essay, the examiner will give you credit for that. Okay, now we're getting really close to the end of the video. So choosing the right essay for you. How do you choose the right essay? I've touched on it a little bit earlier, speaking about head and not heart. The main thing when it comes to choosing essays is to choose the one with the greatest mark potential. Okay, so that should be your only criteria. When you look at the two questions, you should be thinking, oh, which of these can get me the highest marks? I don't care which of the topics you like. I don't care which of the topics you enjoy writing about. You're there for marks, okay? So think, which of these topics can get me the most marks? I suggest that you take an objective look at both titles and try to make a speed plan. Okay, so a quick carve up of both essay titles. Which one has more scope? Which one can you fill in more boxes for? Which one has more detail that you know? And look out for the following. So look out for clues in the title. So things like biology or biological. This gives you the opportunity to draw from a wide range of levels and or kingdoms. So things like living organisms offers an easy splitting into animals, bacteria, fungi, and other generic examples as well. There are also a few trigger words that you should be aware of, in my opinion. When they ask you about things like relationships, it's always between something and something else. So something like structure and function. These questions are doable, but one thing that people trip up on the most is that they skid off it. So like they just go off on a tangent and they talk only about the structure or they talk only about the function. If you're going to do a question about relationships, make sure that you constantly link in between the two things they're talking about. So if it's structure and function, constantly link it. This is why that box of planning is so important, so that you've got your structure, you've got your function, and you can constantly link these two parts together. Okay, so now putting it all together, I'm just going to go through everything that we've spoken about and how to write the perfect 25 over 25 mark essay. A good essay will start with the definition of the title keyword. What definitions do is that they show precision and knowledge and demonstrate a good understanding of the content. Starting with one sets the context of the essay and gives you a solid entry into the material. If your essay title was proteins and their importance to living organisms, a good definition opener could be: proteins are polymers of amino acids joined by peptide bonds which have a wide variety of key functions in living organisms. What you want to do next is to follow up with a statement of intent. So what is a statement of intent? What this is a statement that demonstrates a clear focus for the essay and details the objective in a clear and concise manner. So continuing the example above, we could now add something like: This essay will detail many of the specific roles in plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria, and highlights the benefits these molecules confer to the organism. So we've had our definition, we've had our statement of intent. Then you want to have a clear, discernible structure. The precise structure will follow from the planning stage and be specific to different essays. So, using the example above again, if you're talking about pancreatic amylase, which hydrolyzes starch into maltose, you should not have that in the same section as penicillase, which is an enzyme released by a fungus that hydrolyzes cell walls of bacteria. You want to move on into having breadth and not depth, okay? A good essay would cover a few specific examples of many roles of proteins like enzymes, hormones, receptors, flare, channels, antigens, antibodies, rather than many examples of just hormones and enzymes. A good essay shows an understanding of the title and not just repeating it. So in essays such as the one that we've been talking about, it's very common to find phrases like receptors like the insulin receptor have a specific shape to recognize only insulin, and so they are really important for proteins. This is very low level writing, okay? This is telling the examiner that it's important rather than demonstrating to him that you understand why, okay? So they want you to show, demonstrate, and not just tell, okay? So instead, you could phrase it this way: the insulin receptor's complementary shape to insulin ensures a cell-specific response to the hormone, causing the glucose channel to open only when the concentration is high enough. So this has a bit more breadth, and it's you demonstrating that you understand the title rather than just telling the examiner that, ooh, insulin is important. One more thing a good essay does is it uses specific content from the syllabus, okay? So this should be an obvious point. A clear demonstration of your syllabus specific material will always impress the examiner, and it targets mark points you know will be there. This is why having the specification on hand and knowing what you're expected to know for your A-level biology exam is so important, because when it comes to the essay, you can give them what you know they're looking for. Now in your textbooks, you've got the how science works boxes. It's normally like at the end of the textbook, something like that. Make sure that you can incorporate things like that as well. So statements like in the new article of The Scientist, it was suggested that blah 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 will unconsciously help the examiner rate you as someone who has read around the biology and related subjects, okay? So again, you're increasing your breadth and you're letting the examiner know, you're trying to impress the examiner, let them know that you know your stuff. One more thing that a good essay does is it contains specific named examples. So always add quality and flesh to your essay and add named examples of enzymes. So things like maltase, DNA polymerase, helicase, things like that. If you're talking about hormones, include things like ADH, FSH, insulin. If you're talking about fungi, name yeast, bread mold, things like that, okay? And then lastly, one thing a good essay does is this type of essay that avoids being a simple list, okay? The reader is led and guided in a planned sequence through the maze of the content. So you don't just want to list things for your examiner. If you want to do a listing, do that in your planning phase, okay? Don't keep listing things in your actual essay. So these are a few things that I think, if are well incorporated into your essay, will surely, in my opinion, give you 25 marks. Guys, these essays are not easy. I completely appreciate that. They're not easy, and you've got, I think, a month or so to your actual A-level biology exam. So I thought I'd just go through this, and hopefully you can pick a few pointers and a few things to avoid, things to stay clear from in your biology essay. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful. If you found it helpful, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe, and share with anybody else that is going to be sitting their A-level biology exam this summer. Just a quick summary of what we've talked about. We went through how the essay is set up, so being aware of the task that you're being set. We went through the 16 to 3 to 3 to 3 rule. We then explored scanning the title for clues for effective planning. We went through how to plan to gain marks. We went through organizing the perfect essay. We then talked about what to do if you're stuck. We talked about timing, how to make sure that you're effectively timing your work and that you have enough time to both plan and write your essay, and also go back to the plan at the end if you've got time and add a bit more flesh to the bone of your plan. Then we talked about how to choose the right essay for you, and then finally finished it off with putting everything together and writing the best 25-25 marker. So yes, I hope you found this helpful, and I hope that you feel a bit more confident going into exam. I know it can be a bit daunting, but you've got this.